Grand Prix is the ultimate in motor racing. Most countries don't get a World Championship Grand Prix the first time they apply for one, but Canada did.
Everything seems to be in readiness for the start of the first Formula One World Championship event ever to be run in Canada. The very top competition in the auto racing world is here. The very top drivers in the world. We'll see some spectacular action, no doubt. You're just about ready to go, and they move on.
Of the thousands of motor racing drivers in the world, perhaps 20 are really qualified to drive Formula One Grand Prix cars. Of that elite group of super athletes, most are at Canada's Mosport track today, facing conditions that would destroy lesser men.
Jimmy Clark leading. Dennis Hulme in second place. Graham Hill in third. Stewart has moved up to fourth and fifth. Gurney sixth. Spence seventh. McLaren.
The names glitter. Jack Brabham of Australia, 3 times world champion. Scotland's Jimmy Clark, twice world champion. First foreigner in 50 years to win the Indianapolis 500. Star-Spangled Dan Gurney. Graham Hill of England, another world champion and another Indy winner. New Zealander Bruce McLaren, who also builds his own cars and wins in them. Jochen Rindt of Austria, last year's 3rd highest in World Championship point standings. Chris Amon of the legendary Ferrari team. The greats are here. Stewart, Spence, Hobbs, Irwin, Bonnier, Fisher. And 2 Canadians, Eppie Weeks in a Lotus and Al Pease in a somewhat reluctant Gurney Eagle.
Al Pease did not get away. He's in the pits. They're looking in the cockpit of the car. As soon as I find out, I'll let you know.
Clark now coming in front of the start-finish line again, and with Jimmy's working frantically. Both these drivers are twitching the steering wheels frantically to keep these cars moving in a straight line. Into the pits we have car number 71, that's Jochen Rindt.
On a dry track, a Grand Prix car can do 180 miles an hour. On today's wet and slippery track, with visibility severely limited, these cars are still touching 125 miles an hour, riding that hairline just this side of disaster.
They're all having trouble in Moss as they swing out on the outside of it, but in the chute they're using a different line.
Chris Amons
Must have on dry weather tires.
Jackie Stewart right behind Jack Brabham in the number 5 spot, followed by Mike Spence and Chris Irwin. Then there's the gap, and we have Dan Gurney, who is not moving that quickly, David Hobbs, Joe Rindt, and Joe Bonnier.
Al Pease is just trying to get away right now. He's had a battery problem. It's either loose connections or a dead battery. We're not sure which yet.
The Grand Prix car weighs usually less than 1,500 pounds. Its rear-mounted engine delivers 400-odd horsepower to fat, foot-wide tires. It is built to a precise international formula. With its spare parts, it can be worth $100,000.
Dennis Hulme has the lead from Jimmy Clark as they go through Moss Corner, and he's going up the back straight. He was taking it between corner 1 and 5 here.
Motor racing is the biggest spectator sport there is, by far outdrawing baseball, football, soccer, or bullfighting. Why? Because of its supermen performing super feats of skill. Men like this year's superstar, Dennis Hulme.
Gives you great satisfaction that you've completed a race and won it. You've had an car in all opposite lock and various positions on the circuit and got away with it, and you've come home the winner, driven it as hard as you can for 2.5 hours or so. And this gives you great satisfaction.
Men began racing cars almost as soon as there were cars to race. By 1903, they were whipping great spidery machines up to speeds of 90 miles an hour over open, dusty country roads. And in 1906, the first Grand Prix race was held near a French village called Le Mans. The rules? That the track should be a circuit so the crowds could see the cars going by repeatedly, and that the race should be open to race-worthy cars and competent drivers of all nations. These are still the basic rules of Grand Prix. Once it was thought the heavier a car was, the safer it was. It didn't turn out that way, but it gave bystanders a sense of participation. By the late 20s, all of Europe was acclaiming the great racing drivers of the period. Birkin of England, Chiron of France, and from Italy, Varzi, Campari, and the man still considered by many the greatest driver that ever lived, Tazio Nuvolari. By the 30s, both Germany and Italy saw the propaganda value of motor racing and instructed their factories to build fast cars regardless of cost. They did, and drivers wound them up to speeds, especially on Italy's new well-banked Monza track, as high as 190 miles an hour. Bentley, Bugatti, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, Mercedes-Benz, and Auto Union were literally fighting the war on Grand Prix racetracks before it ever reached the battlefields. Speed, crowds, thrills. Motor racing had everything. But then the war came, and Europe turned its attention to a grimmer kind of spectacle. After the war, disused airports became available as handy tracks, and serious motor racing came to Canada. By today's standards, it was pretty amateur, but it had the elements: speed, noise, and thrills. Canadian interest grew, and then came the Mosport track and the inaugural Players 200. One of the world's 6 best is how the course is described by its first winner, Sterling Moss. Public interest in speed was growing. At the new Westwood track in British Columbia, Lotuses were racing against Porsches, Ferraris against Chaparrals. A new track was opened at Saint-Jovic in Quebec's Laurentians. Canadians were taking to motor racing, but so far only in sports cars. Fast sports cars, but sports cars. In Europe, meanwhile, true Grand Prix motor racing had produced the true Grand Prix car, the cigar-shaped, exposed-wheeled Formula One. It had also produced the true Grand Prix driver, ice-cold, unflappable, able to drive any car on any kind of track, and win. This is the Grand Prix of Monaco, 1967. The Monaco track is city streets, never more than 2 lanes wide, steeply up and steeply down, through a tunnel so curved you can't see the exit from the entrance, and out along an unfenced waterfront. At Monaco, there's not a yard of ground in which a driver can make a mistake and not pay heavily for it. But this is Grand Prix motor racing. fastest man at Monaco was New Zealander Dennis Hulme, who collects his traditional wreath, traditional bottle of wine, and his all-important 9 points toward the World Driving Championship. And at Mosport, 8 World Championship Grand Prix later, the fastest man is again New Zealand's Dennis Hulme, now at the 15th lap of the 90-lap Grand Prix of Canada.
Dennis Hulme, the present leader in the World Driving Championship win standings, and if Dennis Hulme picks up a victory here this weekend, he is going to be extremely difficult to beat out for that championship. A third position here today and a couple of thirds at the next 2 or 3 Grand Prix will give him enough points to hold off the best challenge from any of these cars. Jack Brabham has the best shot at winning the title other than Dennis Hulme, and Brabham has 25 points to Hulme's 37 points.
Though Grand Prix motor racing started at the turn of the century, it was not until 1950 that a point system was evolved that showed which driver was best of all. Since then, the World Championship title has been held by only 9 men. Current reigning champion and 3-time world winner is calm 42-year-old Jack Brabham, now lying 4th place in the 20th lap of the first Grand Prix of Canada, a race that is proving an incredible test of skill, even for the best motor car drivers in the world.
The track is drying out. David Stone tells us that the lap times are coming down now very definitely. So we'll perhaps see the Ford-powered cars and Dan Gurney special really moving up with a little more serious crack at the leaders, although at this point it certainly is a very serious race. Chris Irwin sliding around on the start-finish straight. He didn't hit anything though. He spun wildly.
Many European tracks consist of town roads or regular highway. Mosport was built for racing, and according to the men in the Formula One cars, it ranks with the most challenging. This is American ace Dan Gurney.
I think it's tricky because there are several blind, off-wind or downhill corners that you have to commit yourself as far as how fast you're going in pretty early. If you're going too fast at that point, not a whole lot you can do about it. It's a real circuit to get you. You can really sink your teeth into it.
Chris Irwin coming into the pitch now.
I went off the road a little bit and got some mud or something in the carburetor and the throttles are sticking, but we may well not continue now.
A Formula One car is a thing of profound engineering beauty. A lean, low beast whose roar quickens the pulse like few other sounds. Its handling qualities, as Dan Gurney says, are extraordinary.
As a rule, I think you can work a Formula One car harder. It'll stand up to more abuse than the other kinds of cars. And therefore, you can just really work up the sweat driving a Formula One car, whereas some of the other cars will just they're not quite man enough to take that sort of punishment.
Al Pease is back on the course too. He just came on the course now. The leaders went through here lapping the Hobbs. Clark is 10 seconds back of Dennis Holm at the present time in our unofficial time room. And we do have a slightly damp track again. No question about it. They can't charge like they have been in the past. But Clark is in number one. Clark's ahead of Dennis Holm. And he now leads the Grand Prix of Canada for the Players Award.
Jimmy Clark, winner of 22 Grand Prix events in 6 years, twice world champion. A man who clearly has the world by the tailpipe. Does he have a secret formula for success?
Yes, try to cross the checkered flag first.
Was dry, Jimmy Clark's power and skill put him into the lead. But his wide-open-engined Lotus car failed in the rain, and Clark is left behind. Sometimes Formula One drivers suffer so much from wind and heat, their hands are blistered and their necks are burned. Today, the hazards are different. Water in the engines, water on the goggles, and even worse, so much water on the track that tires aquaplane, and control is often non-existent. For Grand Prix drivers, it's all in a day's work. Dennis Holm, in second place, now pit stopping, says the main thing about wet driving is the tires.
It's the same for everybody that's raining. You'd have to toss a coin before the race started, whether you thought it was going to rain or not. And if you thought it was going to rain, you could probably put the weather runs on and run slow until it did rain, or else try and beat a little big enough lead on the dry ones and nobody could catch you when it did rain. Depends which tire company you happen to be with, whether you feel happy or not so happy.
Happiness for reigning world champion Jack Brabham is evidently all the rain the skies want to drop. As car after car falls out of the grueling contest, Brabham keeps his foot into it, sits back, and enjoys the ride.
There goes Jack Brabham by the start-finish straight.
Jackie Stewart down here in the pits now. Jackie, what happened? Circle jammed open going into one of the corners and they went sort of straight on. Yeah, difficult is it out there right now? It's slippery. Main thing now is flooding of the track, aquaplaning. On these very white tires, it becomes a major problem. Of course, everyone's having trouble with goggles steaming up, etc.
Dennis Holm into the pits and out of them. 5 years ago, Holm was a mechanic in Jack Brabham's garage. Now he's heading for the 1967 World Championship.
Yellow flag is being waved very actively. Graham Hill is out pushing the tire. It's off into the dirt, and he's pushing it out onto the course, or out of the way, one or the other. He's definitely out of the car, pushing the wheel around, and he's jumped into the car now, and he's going to attempt to start it. We gave it a running start, just as if you had a car with a dead battery and you had it running downhill, and he's off and running.
England's Colin Chapman, the engineering genius who stood the world of motor racing on its ear by winning everything in sight, including the Indianapolis 500, with his funny rear-engined Lotus cars. Just now, he's lost a Lotus. Jimmy Clark is swamped near Moss Corner. But Clark's car is not the only one suffering from the unmerciful conditions on the track today.
Bruce McLaren into the pits. Here's Jim Clark coming into the pits this time around. He's decided not to keep running.
The drivers are the best in the world, and so are the cars. But jockeying a Formula One through a rainstorm at well over 125 miles an hour is clearly a test for titans.
Abby Weeses joins Jim Clark on the sidelines. Number of cars out at this point.
We have Dan Gurney in the pits now. He's coming for a change of cover.
Something that stuck out the same spot. He stopped as I started. So he's down here, that's right.
Jimmy Clark has been knocked out of the lead and into the pits for good on the 56th lap with a wet engine. Says Lotus builder Colin Chapman, we tested the car in rain, but this is ridiculous. So far in this race, the lead has been held by Jimmy Clark, by Dennis Hulme, and now by the all-powerful Jack Brabham, whose roaring first-place Brabham Repco is undulating like a merry surfboard around the final laps of Canada's first World Championship Grand Prix motor race. Brabham's teammate, Dennis Hulme, is having different luck.
Jack Brabham, reigning world champion, looking very good in the Players Grand Prix of Canada. Here comes Jack Brabham, spraying water from the wheels, and he puts his left hand high in the air as he takes the checkered flag, and that's the win. The Players Grand Prix of Canada goes to reigning world champion Jack Brabham of Australia. Dennis Hulme coming in now, and there's Dan Gurney picking out the checkered flag. So just the first three cars in the standings have got the checkered flags.
The winner of Canada's first Grand Prix motor race is Australian Jack Brabham, who has not bungled a ship, who has not placed a wheel wrong, and who, like all the other Formula One drivers here this afternoon, has shown Canadians what Grand Prix, the ultimate in motor racing, is really like. For winner Brabham from J.M. Keith, president of the Imperial Tobacco Company, the Players' Trophy and $10,000 in prize money. For Canadians, a giant step into the big league of world motor racing with the Players Grand Prix of Canada.